Hi! You ever had a game you played as a child that you just can't seem to forget? For me, it was the end of 3rd grade. Summer break had just begun and my best friend and I started up a game that would put its claws deep into my childhood memories. Stunts by Distinctive Software. A racing game in which you raced through steep curves, around sudden road obstacles, launched yourself across the landscape with ramps and, most importantly, loopings. I put so many loopings into my tracks. And every beginning of summer since, I have the urge to boot up stunts again. So when Dan asked me a few weeks ago which art pack for an upcoming jam I'd be interested in, I had answered the car racing one, before my brain had actually caught up with what that would entail. But hey, with so many great packs to pick from, what are the chances he'd actually pick that one anyway, huh? Well, let's talk about how I created TrackSanity. A racing game heavily inspired by stunts, a big chunk of childhood memories, and held together by my desire to have more racing games with loopings in them. You can play it right now for free over on itch. You'll find the link in the video's description. And thank you to Dan and thank you to Cinti for providing the pack for this project. TrackSanity has been a blast to work on. So for this jam, I was blatantly going with stunts as my main inspiration. But due to the 48-hour nature of this jam, I needed the scope to be small and factor in my general cluelessness about racing games. Which actually meant I learned a whole lot about asset design, track design and cars in general over the duration of this project. I love when that happens. The Cinti pack came with a ton of obstacles, cars, scenery, items and buildings, but it lacked the one thing I was so obsessed about: loopings. So off to Blender we go. I feel a pattern emerging. I needed a quick tutorial on how to create one, but the Blender community luckily has tutorials for everything. Just a few minutes later, I had a nice looking looping ready to go and started throwing track elements into a test scene. And ran into the first issue. Come on, move. Yeah, so I have no clue about how to make a car move. Cars behave very differently to humans after all, and I had just learned how to create a humanoid controller in the previous art jam. A few weeks before this jam, I had experimented with creating a car controller, and even after 2 or 3 evenings of work, it had felt really bad to play with. That's why I decided for this jam, I'd get a store-bought asset involved. Ash's vehicle physics. It promised to be ridiculously easy to set up, which was just what I needed, and wow did it deliver on that. And at this point I had all I needed from my project to hopefully work out without too much trouble. A moving car, some self-made obstacles, and a huge amount of assets to pick from when creating tracks. Time to scope this project. What would I be able to implement in 48 hours? I hope to get about 2 tracks done, and maybe some kind of ghost mode or something. Also, Stunts had an amazing replay system, and I hope to maybe be able to create a simple version myself too. But I honestly had zero idea on how to get there. Menus and a lot of camera, checkpoint and options functionalities I already had in my toolbox from other projects, so I hoped I would be able to just copy-paste it into TrackSanity. Planning done, I got back to Unity and started experimenting with different layouts of obstacles. Things like how much lead-up would the player need? How much space was needed between obstacles and such. That's when I noticed a crucial flaw in my design. I wasn't able to drive through the loopings. The car just stopped at a certain angle. Did I really have to brush up on how physics works for this? Oh, please no. Disregarding the physics option, I went straight to a somewhat convoluted one I told myself would be so much easier. Working with splines. I drew the general shape of the looping, added an entry and exit area, and automated hooking up the car to the system as soon as it crossed the trigger. Hey, this was easier than I thought. Set, done, given a try, and you ever get that feeling when your gut is trying to tell you what you see is total garbage, but your head is trying to convince you that no, everything is fine. And you just know it tells you that because it's scared of the work it would have to put in to change the situation. Yeah, that is what happened going forward. The system worked remarkably fine. I was able to drive towards the loop, the trigger would get called, the car would get moved around and released at the end. Steering was disabled during that time, and the velocity of the car was supposed to be roughly the one it had when triggering the system. But it felt jarring. There was no slowing down on the way up, no speeding up on the way down, no moment of hesitation at the peak that would make you wonder if you were actually making it or already losing to gravity. I even actually caught myself blinking at the exact time when the controller took over to make myself believe there was no sudden jump or strangeness to how the car behaved. Here, have a look. Does this look fine to you? As a child, watching Knight Rider, I had expected to have a car taking over steering for you to feel kinda epic, but this proved to feel the polar opposite. And just with every sunk cost fallacy, my head tried to convince me that this was alright, really. I had spent almost an hour out of my time budget on learning the spline system, creating the scripts and making it work, and my head was making up all kinds of excuses to stay on track with the system. Nobody would notice, it's just a jam game. This is totally how it feels in roller coasters too. No, it really doesn't. But really, it had to go. The fun of loopings is not just seeing it in the distance, it's the speed, the slowdown, the apprehension, the thrill. And in games, being able to just fail and fall or drive off at odd angles and crashing is absolutely a factor of fun as well. I got myself some chocolate ice cream, scrapped the whole system, and learned how to make it work with custom gravity, collider sizes, speed, acceleration. And honestly, it was much easier than I had expected. Not that I didn't break it at least 8 more times over the course of this project. But in all seriousness, this is now a much better experience. And by learning how to do it wrong the first time, I managed to learn what made loopings special to me, why I love them so much, instead of just going in with a vague idea of, yay, loopings are awesome. On top of understanding what makes loopings cool, came yet another aspect I hadn't expected to learn. Stunts design had a cool feature I had never really given much thought. See those black areas that look like metal grills? They're on bridges, loopings and pipes, for example. I had never paid them much attention. I mean, they're just another texture to make things a bit more interesting, right? But driving through my initially all-street textured looping made me realize these see-through textures served a critical purpose. The driver was able to see the surroundings, and thus it didn't feel like just driving along a boring curved road, but instead you could see the surrounding area being turned upside down, see the sky, see the light reflecting at different angles, and get just generally a much better feel of where you are in relation to everything else. Implementing those in my own objects instantly made the whole experience so much better. The biggest chunk of time was then spent designing the tracks and testing if they were possible to drive and finish. Lots of tweaking values and colliders, placing, removing and relocating level objects during this phase. And if you are ever in a similar situation, I highly recommend the Smart Library add-on you see me using a ton in this project. It's basically a collection you can sort elements into with your own criteria without having to restructure a whole asset pack. And the assets can sit in multiple categories as well. Link in the description. In the end, I had 3 tracks. A night-themed one with lots of mountains, a shortcut and a huge set piece at the end. Detailing this one had felt a little bit rough, since it is set in the mountains and the Synthi pack had a huge selection of car, workshop and harbor-themed objects, but when it comes to nature, I'd recommend to maybe mix and match with one of their biomes packs. On the second and third track, on the other hand, I try to heavily utilize this harbor focus with areas themed around containers, wood, living areas, and wait, there are some good-looking workshops in the pack, but no houses? Okay, I modeled a rough one in Blender then too. It had the additional bonus of being big, blocky, and stackable, so I was able to give my levels a little bit of a skyline with it too, or make parts of tracks feel a little bit more cramped. I adore the cranes in the pack, they are amazing looking set pieces. But there are hardly any other big pieces to go with them to give a bit of verticality and distant scenery. And driving through my tracks without these high buildings, I realized I was hardly getting a good clue as to where I was located on the tracks in relation to other themed areas. Having a skyline in the distance helps a lot with that. Very late, I realized one mistake I might have done by going crazy with cluttering my scenes, though. Turns had to become incredibly precise, otherwise the car would get stuck. If you fell off a ramp or a loop, there was a high chance you'd not be able to get back on the track at all, requiring a restart. Controlling the car was super finicky due to my physics tinkering earlier to get the looping workable. So, in case you tried to micro-adjust on a long straight road, you had to basically butterfly tap the steering wheel. It felt like stunts had been an action racer, while my game was aiming to be a precision racer instead. So I had to remove a bunch of objects again, which felt like a step back at first, but testing it later showed it was the right thing to do. Some areas can still feel a bit too cramped, but I think for the time and level of knowledge I put in, I'm happy with the results. Also, I took a little time to change the steering behavior. Now the longer you press to steer, the greater effects you receive. That was actually much easier to implement than expected. Next up was camera control. One for the cockpit, one for behind, with an easy switch between both. And I really liked this. A friend mentioned that racing games have a hood camera too, which I didn't really understand at first. Isn't the fun sitting in the car, seeing the wheel turn? Or at least the car itself, because it just looks cool? But okay, I implemented that one as well, and was pleasantly surprised. Feels like soaring over the track now. Sometimes the angle feels a little bit cramped too, but hey, first try I'm doing this, I'm learning. Next up was detailing. Yeah, after having removed a bunch of stuff, I felt like adding more again, but this time in the form of cheering crowds. At first I positioned each one by hand, rotating them into the most likely direction the car would be in when they are in view. And do you ever develop a game and just forget you are able to do stuff through code? Is it just me? It took an embarrassing 20 minutes until I realized I could just have them turn towards the car automatically. Ugh. Anyway, yay, cheering crowds! They really added some visual sugar to the game, since everything else is rather static. Onwards to the logo. I typically have a plan on how I think it should look, but I hadn't settled on a name yet, after my first dozen or 24 names already had been used for racing games. Luckily, a friend, hi Alex, came up with a great name that hadn't already been used in this context, and I started with picking some cool racing game looking fonts, positioning the words, and narrowing down from there. This took a bit less than an hour, and thanks to this font not coming with licenses to use in games, I had to create all the labels in Illustrator as well. I really wasn't terribly happy about this, I still am not, but hey, it worked well enough. Then came the UI parts, implementing a start menu, a pause system, the high score, and the options. But this time, it barely took any time to set it up, yay, because I was able to just copy-paste them as I had hoped from my toolbox. The time I had taken between my previous project and this one to improve the options menu really paid off here. Having the basic functionality and core tracks done, I tried implementing a very simple ghost system. It will record your best round, so you can race against it to beat it. I had been skeptical when I saw the surprisingly short runtime of the tutorial I looked up for this, but it actually wasn't as complex as I had expected it to be. I changed a few parts here and there, like how the ghost gets saved and turned from a scriptable object into a regular class, but the functionality is very similar. It really works well enough for this project. Only thing left to do on my list of stuff I had wished to include was a replay from different angles. Those always had major 80s, 90s action movie vibes to me, and until the ghost system, I hadn't been sure on how I could have implemented it. But having been able to make that work, this was surprisingly straightforward. When you've completed the last lap and crossed the finish line, the player's camera will switch to the track cameras. Each one checks if they're the nearest one to the car and follow it just like the cheering crowds do. It's actually the exact same scripts. Until another camera is closer, that is. And this might have been a good use case to use a Cinemachine Freelook camera, but I have never worked with those before. Given the time left, just using a bunch of virtual cameras was the easiest solution to implement. Finding the right positions for the camera, on the other hand, was a little bit tricky, as I needed to keep in mind where the car was, where it might be triggering a wrong camera, and to not suddenly switch axes. It didn't always play out like expected, but hey, for a first try, I'm honestly quite proud of this. Seeing the game's tracks through the multiple camera angles of the track cams gave the whole game a bit more polish, even though I barely knew what I was doing and my code is barely more than a very, very rough draft. In one of the last steps, I retextured the custom obstacles I had created. They stuck out a bit due to the first rough and ugly texturing I had applied. Cutting a couple corners, I can say I'm alright enough with the results I got. I also needed to redo the angled curves, because due to how I set those up initially, I sometimes hit overlapping colliders in a strange way. It felt like driving headfirst into a wall, which had majorly bugged me. There can still sometimes be unintended steering maneuvers, but they are quite rare. But maybe by now I'm just so used to how my game works that I just managed to not run into these issues anymore. I guess playtesting will tell. I mean, by all means, tell me. Releasing an unpolished project, no matter if game or not, always irks me a little and was a major point why I try to stay away from jams. But I also have seen how much they help in getting a better grasp on how long things can, should or will take, how to use good tools to break down on time required, and how much experimenting with systems has helped me in quickly improving in some areas I've been lacking. And the end result is, even if not polished, a good prototype of a game I can be proud of. Really, if you're on the fence when it comes to jams, giving them a try could be a fun way to learn, experiment, and see something you can label as done at the end. That is such a good feeling. Just a little bit of cleanup left, then I was finally able to call this jam done. 1 car, 3 tracks, lots of loopings, and a whole lot of stuff I've learned about cars and racing games. Oh, and lots of things I now understand better about one of my favorite games of all time too. My game is obviously not Stunts, but it is Stunts as I remembered it and how I remembered feeling playing it back during summer break with my best friend. Just created by myself with all the quirks that come with that. I wonder what the other thought about TrackSanity.
I really like the feedback on these buttons. I don't like the fact that these differ from these though. Oh, the audio settings work here though. But yeah, the car controller feels really nice. Christina, do you pull like Trackmania or something? This feels good. Okay, the timer doesn't work. Oh my god, does this speedometer actually react to the speed? Overall, I really like the map design, it's really well made. I really love the lighting on this game. That's some talented game dev right here. Good game.
Okay, so TrackSanity. I thought this game had fantastic track design. I think it's immediately obvious that a lot of time went into building out all these different tracks. There's just a lot of good details and the assets were used very well, and it makes an overall really nice track that's fun to play. I think it plays nicely in both first person as well as third person modes. I thought this game had a great soundtrack, and I thought it was really cool that there were people just kind of cheering all throughout the map, which was pretty cool. I do wish there was a little bit of an easier way to reset back to the previous checkpoint. I know there is kind of a way you can do it through the pause menu, but it wasn't necessarily the most intuitive to me, and I think I might have gotten a couple little bugs from doing that, but overall, really solid, fun racing game. Nicely done.
Okay, TrackSanity. Oh, nice jump, nice jump. Oh! We're still on, we're still good, we're still going. Oh my gosh! You know, despite my inability to drive well, I'm really liking the way this feels. It gives me like good nostalgia for like Gran Turismo 6 and other first-person like racing sim games. It's very cool. Yeah, this is really cool. It feels really polished, and I like the level design as well. It's very nice. There we go. Way nice. The physics coding in this must be like really good, because especially with the angled slopes, the fact that I stick to them, and the loop-de-loops as well, like that's really good. Fair play. If there was anything that I maybe wished that I had that doesn't exist at the moment, it'd probably just be some like indicator to show which way to go. And the steering feels slightly too sensitive sometimes. But other than that, this is just brilliant. I love it.
Oh, first person perspective, okay. Ooh, look at that sky. Speed on! I hit a tree. Man, it looks really good. Ooh! Barrel roll! Yo! Oh, I think I just skipped a part of the track. Speedrun strategies. Oh my goodness, there's a ghost!
I love seeing people play my games. Thank you so much, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this. I sure did. If you did too, give the video a like, please. And watch Dan's big compilation video about all the projects we made for the jam. You can play the game right now for free on itch. I hope you'll have a fun time with it and also fall in love with loopings, just like I have back in elementary school. And if you're up for another devlog, I recently took part in another art jam by Dan, in which I created a relaxing photography adventure set on a mountain. Basically the polar opposite of this game. You can play that one on itch as well. Have a great week!